She had $30 left in her bank account. Her mother had 6 weeks to live, and the only man who could save her was the one everyone in New York was afraid to look in the eye. If this story hits close to home, subscribe to our channel and follow every part until the end, and drop your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Sophia Bennett had never stolen anything in her 25 years of life. Not a candy bar when she was 7, not a pencil from a coworker's desk, not even an extra napkin from a restaurant that had already overcharged her. But standing in that hospital corridor at 11:15 on a Tuesday night staring at a bill that had just climbed to $84,000, she understood for the first time why desperate people made desperate choices. The billing administrator had a kind face, soft eyes, the practiced expression of someone who delivered bad news so often it had stopped feeling like news at all. "Ms. Bennett," the woman said, "I'm truly sorry, but without the next payment installment by the end of the month, we'll have to discuss transitioning your mother to palliative. Don't." Sophia's voice came out quieter than she intended. "Don't say that word. I understand this is difficult." "You don't." She said it without cruelty, just fact. "You don't understand. She's not a case number. She's my mother. She taught 3rd grade for 31 years. She made lunches for kids whose parents forgot. She sang in the church choir every Sunday, even when her knees hurt so badly she could barely walk to the pew." Sophia pressed her hand flat against the counter to stop it from shaking. "She does not get a palliative care conversation, not yet." The administrator said nothing. She had nothing left to say. Sophia walked back to her mother's room, stood in the doorway, and watched the woman sleeping in the narrow hospital bed. Elena Bennett looked smaller than Sophia remembered, thinner. The disease had taken weight from her face, from her hands, from the place behind her eyes, where her particular kind of stubborn joy used to live. But she was breathing. And as long as she was breathing, Sophia was going to fight. She took out her phone in the hallway and looked at her bank account for the 4th time that day, as though the number might have changed. It hadn't. $31.47. A week until rent was due. 2 weeks until the next hospital payment deadline. She opened every job posting app she had installed. She'd been working 2 jobs already, a morning shift at a coffee shop that paid just above minimum wage, and an evening shift at a hotel front desk that paid slightly less. Together, they weren't close to enough. They hadn't been close to enough for 3 months. She'd already sold her laptop, her camera, the vintage record player that had been a birthday gift from her mother the year she turned 20, and every piece of jewelry she owned except the small gold cross that had belonged to her grandmother. She scrolled through listings, retail positions, customer service, administrative assistant roles that required experience she had but couldn't take because the hours conflicted with her mother's treatment schedule. And then she saw it. Velvet Noir waitstaff positions, available immediate start. Competitive pay, plus gratuities. She almost scrolled past it. Everyone in New York City had heard of Velvet Noir. You didn't hear about it the way you heard about a restaurant opening or a club getting a good review. You heard about it the way you heard about things that existed slightly outside the ordinary rules of the city. In whispers, in warnings, in the careful way people changed the subject when it came up. She'd heard her coworker Marco mention it once, saying he knew a guy who waited tables there for 6 months and left with enough money to pay off his student loans. She'd heard a woman at the hospital describe seeing a senator walk in through a side entrance at 2 in the morning. She'd heard her neighbor, a retired cop, go quiet in a particular way when someone mentioned the name on a television news segment. Velvet Noir. Luciano Moretti's club. Sophia knew that name. Everybody knew that name. She sat with the listing on her screen for a long time. Long enough that a night nurse walked past her twice and gave her a sympathetic look. Long enough for her mother to shift in her sleep and murmur something that might have been a name. Then Sophia hit apply. Boy, she didn't expect to hear back. She heard back in 4 hours. An interview at 9 o'clock the following morning. A private entrance off a side street in the meatpacking district. Ask for a woman named Diane. Sophia spent the rest of the night on the internet. Not searching for dirt on Luciano Moretti, there was almost none. That was its own kind of information. Men who had actual dirt available online were careless. Men with nothing publicly available were either very clean or very careful. She already knew which category applied here. She searched for the job itself. Former employees. Glassdoor reviews that were conspicuously sparse. A few Reddit threads that had been removed. One comment on a forum from someone who claimed to have worked there for 8 months saying only the pay is real, the rules are real, and if you keep your head down and do your job, nothing bad happens to you. Sophia read that last sentence 3 times. Then she went to sleep for 2 hours and set her alarm. Diane was not what Sophia expected. She was somewhere in her 50s with the posture of a woman who had spent decades making herself small in rooms full of loud men and had come out the other side unbowed. Her clothes were simple and expensive. Her eyes were the kind that measured a person completely in the first 10 seconds and never stopped measuring after that. She didn't offer Sophia coffee or make small talk. "Previous experience?" she asked, looking at the resume Sophia had emailed the night before. 3 years waitstaff at 2 different restaurants. Hotel front desk for the past 1.5 years. I'm fast, I'm professional, I don't complain, and I show up. Everyone says they show up. I've had a perfect attendance record at both current jobs for 11 months while managing a family medical situation. I can provide references who will confirm that. Diane looked up from the paper. What's the medical situation? My mother. Rare autoimmune condition. Expensive treatment. That's why I'm here. Something shifted in Diane's expression. Not pity. Recognition. You understand what kind of establishment this is, Diane said. It wasn't a question. I understand it's a private club with high-profile clientele who require discretion. That's one way to put it. It's the relevant way. Another long look. The clients here are not like the clients you've served before. Some of them are important in ways that make ordinary people uncomfortable. You will see things and hear things. None of it leaves this building. You will not discuss clientele with anyone. You will not take photographs. You will not make the mistake of thinking that curiosity is harmless in a place like this. I'm not curious, Sophia said. I'm working. Diane studied her for another few seconds. Then she set the resume down. You start Friday. She didn't tell anyone. Not Marco, who would have tried to talk her out of it. Not her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, who had been quietly leaving groceries outside her door for 2 weeks. Not her mother, who would have worried, and who was spending enough energy just surviving. She walked into Velvet Noir on a Friday night, wearing the all-black uniform Diane had provided, her hair pulled back, her face composed, and she started working. The club hit her like a physical thing. Not the noise. Velvet Noir was not loud in the way that ordinary clubs were loud. It was something more controlled than that. The music was there, but it was underneath everything else, under the low voices and the crystal glassware and the particular quality of the air that came with money concentrated in one place. The lighting was deep amber and shadow. The furniture was the kind of furniture that cost more than Sophia's monthly rent per individual piece. The clients were exactly what Diane had described, and exactly what Sophia had expected. Men in suits that fit the way only custom suits fit. Women who wore jewelry the way other women wore nothing, not thinking about it, not performing it, just existing inside it. People who had the particular stillness of individuals who had never once in their lives had to hurry because someone else was waiting. Sophia learned the layout in 20 minutes. The main floor, the private booths along the east wall, the VIP section behind the glass partition, the bar that ran the length of the north wall, the kitchen entrance, and where the servers staged their trays. She memorized the drink preferences Diane had noted for regular clients. She learned which booth required which brand of sparkling water. She absorbed the rhythm of the room, the way she'd absorbed the rhythm of every room she'd worked in through observation and attention, and the simple discipline of caring about the work regardless of what the work was. She was nervous. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise, not even to herself. Her hands shook slightly for the first hour. She overcompensated by making her movements more deliberate, slower, careful. Nobody noticed. She served 12 tables in the first 2 hours and made exactly 0 mistakes. By midnight, she'd stopped shaking. By 1 in the morning, she'd found her rhythm. And then she felt it. The sensation of being watched. Not the ambient awareness that came from working a room full of people who might need something at any moment. This was different. More specific. Like a point of focused attention directed at her from somewhere above. She didn't look up immediately. She finished pouring a glass of champagne for a man who didn't look at her when she poured it, carried her empty tray back toward the service station, and then, naturally, as though checking the room for the next table that needed attention, she looked up toward the private balcony that ran along the upper level of the club. A man was standing at the railing. She only had a second. Maybe 2. But in those 2 seconds, she registered several things simultaneously. He was tall, formally dressed even by the standards of this room, and he was looking directly at her with an expression that was entirely unreadable. Not hostile, not predatory. Something quieter, and somehow more unsettling than either of those things. She looked away. She kept working. But for the rest of that night, she was aware of that balcony, the way you're aware of a sound you can't quite identify, present at the edge of every thought, never fully leaving. She went home at 2:30 in the morning with $412 in tips in her jacket pocket. She sat on the edge of her bed and counted it 3 times. It was more money than she made in a full day at either of her other jobs. She transferred it to her savings account, the one she'd labeled Mom, 8 months ago, and lay back on her bed without changing clothes and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the man on the balcony. She'd known even in that brief look who he was. The balcony was his. The room was his. The city had a particular relationship with Luciano Moretti's name, and the man standing in that spot, with that stillness, with that expression, could not have been anyone else. She had a rule she was putting in place right now. In this moment, lying on her bed at 3 in the morning, she was not going to think about Luciano Moretti more than the job required. She was going to go to work, do her job, take her money, and save her mother. That was the entire plan. Clean and simple and survivable. She closed her eyes. She thought about her mother's face when the doctors first used the words treatment plan. The exhausted hope in it. The way Elena Bennett had reached across the hospital bed and taken her daughter's hand and said very quietly, "You don't have to do this." "I know," Sophia had said. "Sophia, I know, Mom. I want to." She fell asleep with the light on and dreamed about nothing. 3 weeks into working at Velvet Noir, Sophia knew the rhythm of the place well enough that it had started to feel almost ordinary. Not safe. She was careful never to confuse familiarity with safety. But ordinary, in the way that any job becomes ordinary when you're good at it, and you focus on the mechanics rather than the context. She knew which clients tipped generously, and which ones would leave her nothing despite ordering $800 worth of liquor. She knew that the man in booth 7 who came in every Thursday was conducting business he absolutely did not want overheard, and that his usual waitress had quit because of it, which was why Sophia now had booth 7 and handled it by becoming functionally invisible, present enough to fill glasses, absent enough to be forgotten. She knew that the beautiful woman who always sat alone at the corner of the bar was not waiting for anyone and did not want to be spoken to, and that the correct response to this was to ensure her glass was never empty and her space was never invaded. She knew that every employee of Velvet Noir operated by a set of unspoken rules that were more real than any written policy. See everything. Remember nothing. Speak to no one who isn't speaking to you, and keep your personal life so thoroughly outside these walls that it might as well not exist. She was good at all of these things. What she hadn't accounted for was Marcus. Marcus was 22, hired as a busser 2 weeks before Sophia started, and he had the particular combination of youth and anxiety that made him both sweet and occasionally catastrophic. He tried hard. He moved too fast. He cared too much about whether people liked him, which in a room like this was the equivalent of a wound that never closed. On a Thursday night in Sophia's 3rd week, Sophia was carrying a tray of drinks toward the private booths when she heard the sound that every person who has worked in service knows, without being taught, the sound of an accident beginning. She turned in time to see Marcus moving too quickly around the corner of the service station, catch his tray on the edge of the partition. The glasses went in every direction. One of them, a tumbler of scotch that had been on its way to a man in a suit who was looking the other direction, came down and hit the client directly. The room did not go silent. Velvet Noir was the kind of place that absorbed disruption without reacting visibly. But Sophia felt the quality of the air change in that precise instant. A kind of attention that was worse than silence. The client stood up slowly. He was wide. He had the kind of face that had never learned patience. I am so sorry. Marcus was already talking, already too fast, already wrong. Sir, I'm so sorry. Do you have any idea how much this jacket? I'll pay for it. Marcus said it before he'd had time to think about whether that was possible. I'll pay for it. I swear you'll pay for it. The man's voice dropped. In Sophia's experience, when voices dropped instead of rising, that was when you needed to move. You think you can pay for this jacket, you? Sophia was already at Marcus's shoulder. Sir? Her voice was level and practiced and gave away nothing. I sincerely apologize on behalf of our staff. We'll have your jacket dry cleaned by our service tonight at no cost, and the drink is of course complimentary. Can I get you a fresh glass right now? The man looked at her. People always looked when you spoke with enough calm into a tense situation. It didn't fix anything, it just introduced a second option, and sometimes that was enough. He knocked a drink on me. He did, and that is completely unacceptable, and I apologize. We take care of it completely right now. Can I bring you that drink? A long pause, the kind that feels longer than it is. Fine. He sat back down. Sophia turned to Marcus, leaned close, and said very quietly, Go to the back. Deep breath. I've got your tables. Sophia, Go. He went. She covered his section for the next hour, running between her own tables and his, without making it look like she was running. At 2 a.m, when the section had cleared, she found Marcus in the break room with his head in his hands and a look on his face that told her he'd been sitting with worst-case scenarios for the past 60 minutes. Hey, she sat across from him. You're okay. I could have gotten fired. I could have. He stopped, swallowed. That guy, do you know who that is? Do you know what Table 7 actually is? I know enough. Then you know that spilling a drink on that man is not just embarrassing, it's... He shook his head. My mom has been sick. I needed this job. I can't lose this job. Sophia looked at him for a moment. Your mom, she said. Yeah, it's bad. I don't want to get into it. He rubbed his face. I need this job to keep working. She thought for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the folded bills she'd been carrying all night. Marcus stared at her. What are you doing? This is for the dry cleaning, in case they try to charge you separately. Sophia, that's your... It's fine. She set it on the table. Don't argue with me, and don't move too fast on the floor. You're trying to do everything at once and it's making you sloppy. Slow down. Do one thing completely, then the next thing. He was quiet for a moment. Why are you helping me? She thought about her mother in a hospital bed, about an $84,000 bill, about $31 in a bank account. Because somebody should, she said. Now get some water and go back to work. She didn't know that anyone had seen this exchange. She didn't know that the break room had a camera. She didn't know that the man who controlled every camera in this building had watched the entire thing from the moment of the accident to the moment she placed money on the table for a boy she'd known for 3 weeks. She didn't know any of that. She just went back to work. The first time Luciano Moretti spoke to her directly, she almost didn't realize it was happening. He came to the main floor on a Tuesday night, which was unusual. She'd understood quickly that he appeared in the public areas of the club very rarely and never without reason. He moved through the room the way certain people move through rooms without effort, without announcement, and with the specific quality of space that opens up around a person when everyone in the vicinity has registered their presence and made an unconscious adjustment. Sophia was refilling a water glass when she became aware of him standing at the edge of the bar. He was not looking at her. That was what she noticed first. Every other time she'd been aware of him from the balcony, From the edge of her peripheral vision on the floor, he had been watching her in that concentrated, unreadable way. Now he appeared to be looking at something across the room, his expression closed and entirely elsewhere. She filled the water glass. She moved to the next table. The client in booth 9 ordered the Barolo 15 minutes ago. She stopped. He hadn't turned toward her. His eyes were still on the far side of the room. "I know," she said. "The sommelier pulled the wrong vintage. I'm waiting for the correct bottle." A pause. "The client in booth 9 is not a patient man." "I'm aware. I've already apologized twice and explained we're locating the specific bottle he requested. He's unhappy, but he's still seated." Now Luciano turned his head. He looked at her the way she'd seen him look at things from the balcony, with that complete quiet attention that took in more than it appeared to. "You handled the incident with my employee last Thursday." It wasn't a question. He'd seen it. She'd already figured that out. "Someone needed to handle it," she said. "You gave him money. He needed it. You needed it." She met his eyes. It was harder than she'd expected, not because he was intimidating, though he was, but because his eyes had a quality she hadn't expected. She'd been prepared for cold. She'd been prepared for the specific variety of contempt that powerful men often directed at service workers. She hadn't been prepared for the thing she saw instead, which wasn't warmth exactly, but was something like attention. Real attention. The kind that meant he was actually seeing her, not a waitress, not an employee, but her. It made her want to look away. She didn't. "Booth 9, she said. "I'll check on the bottle." She walked away before he could respond. Her heart was beating considerably faster than it had any right to. Says, the bottle of Barolo arrived. The client in booth 9 received it without comment. Sophia moved through the rest of her shift without incident and collected her tips and went home. She told herself the conversation had meant nothing. Business exchange, a manager checking on a situation, nothing more. She told herself this about 7 times over the next 2 days. She went back to the hospital. Her mother was having a good week. There were good weeks and bad weeks, and Sophia had learned to live entirely in the good ones while they were happening, and not borrow trouble from the bad ones until they arrived. Elena was sitting up, which was good. She'd eaten breakfast, which was better. She wanted to know about the new job, which Sophia had described vaguely as a private events venue in the meatpacking district. "Is it safe?" Elena asked. "It's fine, Mom." Sophia. "It's completely fine. The pay is good, the management is professional, and I'm good at the work." Elena looked at her daughter for a long moment, with the particular expression that mothers develop over decades of learning their children's evasions. "I worry about you," Elena said. "You're supposed to be letting me do the worrying." "That's not how it works." "That's exactly how it works. You rest. I handle things. That's the arrangement." Elena reached out and took her hand. Her grip was still strong. That was something. "You know you don't have to." "Mom." Sophia kept her voice very steady. "I'm okay. I promise. I'm more okay than I've been in months." It was almost true. 2 weeks later, something happened that Sophia hadn't planned for. She'd been working a private event on the upper floor, a dinner for 12, that Diane had pulled her specifically for telling her without elaborating that these clients required someone reliable. Sophia had spent the first 2 hours of the event running the service efficiently and staying exactly as invisible as the room required. She was clearing a tray of dessert plates near the door to the private corridor when she heard voices from around the corner. She wasn't paying attention to them. Ambient noise in a building like this was not her concern until a specific phrase reached her through the conversation and lodged itself like a splinter. "By Friday, the shipment and the account both. He won't expect it from that direction." She stopped moving. She knew intellectually that she should keep moving, that she should continue walking with her tray back toward the service elevator and complete her work and go home and understand nothing about what she had just heard. She stood still for 3 more seconds. "Moretti's been comfortable too long. Comfort makes a man stupid." Does Rico know what he's walking into? Rico knows enough. He doesn't need to know more than that. Sophia walked. She walked carefully and quietly back to the service station and set her tray down and stood there for a moment with her hands flat on the counter. She thought about what she'd heard. She thought about what it would cost her to repeat it. She thought about what it might cost her to not repeat it. She spent the rest of the shift running through every version of this calculation she could construct and arriving at the same conclusion every time. At the end of the night, when the floor had cleared and she was collecting her things from the break room, she stopped in the corridor outside the door to the private offices that she'd identified as belonging to management in her first week. She stood there for a moment. She knocked. The man who opened the door was not Luciano. He was one of the people she'd learned to categorize as inner circle, always present, never introduced. Watching the room with the particular vigilance of people whose job was to watch rooms. "I need to speak with Mr. Moretti," Sophia said. The man looked at her without expression. "Mr. Moretti is unavailable. I understand. Will you please tell him that the waitress from the main floor needs to speak with him about something she overheard this evening? He'll know which one." A pause that she couldn't read. Then, "Wait here." She waited. 60 seconds. 90. Long enough for her to begin questioning every decision she'd made in the past 4 minutes. The door opened. Luciano was standing on the other side of it. He had the look of a man who had been in the middle of something. His jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and there was a quality of interrupted thought about him that made him seem for the first time slightly more human. He looked at her. "You had something to say," he said. "I heard something tonight," Sophia said. "I don't know if it matters, but I think it does. And I need you to know that I'm not trying to get involved in whatever it is. I heard something, and I think you should know." She told him. She told him exactly what she'd heard, in the same order she'd heard it, without embellishment and without interpretation. The words about Friday, the shipment, the name Rico, the comment about comfort making a man stupid. When she finished, the quality of silence in the corridor had changed. Luciano said nothing for a moment that stretched out past comfort. "Why are you telling me this?" he said finally. The question caught her slightly off guard. She'd expected a different response, gratitude maybe, or acknowledgement, or the professional calculation she'd seen him apply to everything. "Because it seemed like something you needed to know," she said. "You could have stayed quiet." "I could have. That would have been safer for you." "I know." He looked at her. That same look from the bar from the balcony, the one that was more attention than she'd expected from a man like this. "You've been working here for 5 weeks, he said. 6, she said. "As of yesterday." Something crossed his face that she couldn't identify. Not quite a smile. Not quite. Not. "Go home, Ms. Bennett," he said. Carefully. She went, and for the first time since she'd started at Velvet Noir, she didn't think about the job on the way home. She thought about the way Luciano Moretti had said the word carefully, and the fact that it had sounded less like a dismissal and more like something else entirely. She thought about that until she fell asleep. And she didn't have a name for what it meant, but she knew it meant something. The next morning she went to the hospital. Her mother was having a bad day. The kind of bad day that reminded Sophia with brutal efficiency exactly why she was doing everything she was doing. Elena was in pain. She was trying not to show it, which somehow made it worse. The nurse had adjusted medication. The doctor had stopped by with the particular tone of cautious optimism that Sophia had learned to read as professionally managed bad news. "The inflammation markers are elevated," the doctor said. "It's not unexpected at this stage. We're adjusting the treatment protocol." "What does that mean for the timeline?" Sophia asked. "It means we're watching it closely. The next 4 to 6 weeks are going to be significant in terms of determining the trajectory." 4 to 6 weeks. Sophia sat beside her mother's bed after the doctor left and held her hand and said nothing. Elena had fallen asleep. Her breathing was regular if shallow. Her face in sleep was the face Sophia had been watching her whole life, still recognizable, still her underneath everything the disease had taken. "I've got it," Sophia said quietly. Not to wake her, just to say it. Just to make it real by saying it out loud. "I've got it, Mom. Whatever it takes. I've got it." She sat there for an hour. Then she went back to work. God. She didn't see Luciano again for 4 days. On the 5th day, Diane called her into the office before her shift and told her that her schedule had been adjusted. She would be moving to the VIP section permanently, and her hourly rate was being increased by a significant amount. Sophia stared at the number Diane had written on a slip of paper. "This is—" She stopped. "Why, management review," Diane said simply. "I've been here 6 weeks. 7, as of yesterday." Sophia looked at the number again, then at Diane. "Is this because of what I told Mr. Moretti?" Diane's expression didn't change. "This is because you're one of the best people I've put on a floor in 5 years. Take it or leave it." Sophia took it. She went home that night and transferred the extra earnings into her mother's account, and lay on her bed and thought about the fact that Luciano Moretti had done something for her without telling her he was doing it, without requiring acknowledgement, without asking for anything in return. She thought about the word carefully. She thought about his face when she'd said 6, as of yesterday. The thing that had crossed his expression that she couldn't name. She thought about what she'd learned in 7 weeks about a man that the city had spent years building a legend out of that. The legend and the man were not the same thing. That somewhere underneath the silence and the power and the reputation was something she hadn't expected to find. She didn't know yet what to do with that. But she knew that things were shifting. In the city, in the club, inside herself. And that whatever came next was going to be something she hadn't planned for. The raise changed nothing and everything at the same time. Sophia took the VIP section and did the work exactly the way she'd done every job before it, with her head down and her attention forward, and no wasted motion. The clients in the VIP section were different from the main floor clients only in degree. More money, more silence. More of the specific kind of entitlement that came from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. She handled them. She handled the man who sent his drink back 3 times because he was bored. She handled the couple who spoke about her across the table as though she were furniture while she refilled their glasses. She handled the group that arrived at midnight, still burning from whatever business had gone wrong earlier in the evening, and needed somewhere to put that energy. She handled all of it without comment, without reaction, without ever once making it personal. What she couldn't handle, what she was having increasing difficulty pretending she could handle, was the awareness. It had been there since the first night. That specific directed quality of attention from the balcony. But now that she'd spoken to Luciano, now that she understood the shape of his attention more clearly, it had changed. It wasn't less. If anything, it was more. But it was different in a way she didn't have precise language for. He didn't watch her the way the other powerful men in the room watched women. She'd learned to recognize that look with the efficiency of someone who'd been working service long enough to understand that recognizing it early was how you managed it. That wasn't what this was. This was something she had no reference point for. She was in the middle of this exact thought on a Wednesday night 11:30 VIP section, running low on ice, when she turned toward the service station and found Luciano standing 3 feet away. She startled. She didn't mean to. It happened before she could stop it. "I apologize," he said immediately. "I didn't mean to—" "No." She recovered fast. "You're fine. I just didn't hear you." Nobody usually does. She couldn't tell if that was a joke or a fact. With him, the line between the two was difficult to locate. "The Hendricks table needs their check," she said, because something needed to be said. "I know." He wasn't looking at the Hendricks table. "How is your mother?" Sophia went very still. She hadn't told him about her mother. She'd told Diane during the interview because it was relevant. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone else on the floor. She certainly hadn't mentioned it to Luciano Moretti. She stopped. Started again. How do you know about my mother? I know things about the people who work here. You know things about me. Yes. He said it without apology, without the careful evasion most people employed when caught knowing something they shouldn't. He simply said yes, as though the honesty of it neutralized the intrusion. It did not neutralize the intrusion. She's sick, Sophia said carefully. She's getting treatment. It's under control. I know she has a rare autoimmune condition. I know the treatment is expensive. I know the hospital has contacted you about payment twice in the past 3 weeks. The floor seemed to shift slightly under Sophia's feet. Why do you know that? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. Because I wanted to. A pause. Because I watched you give your tips to a boy you'd known 3 weeks so he could cover a dry cleaning bill, and I wanted to understand what kind of person did that. You investigated me. I paid attention to you. There's a difference. There isn't actually. Something crossed his expression, not guilt, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who understood the distinction being drawn, even if he hadn't applied it until this moment. Your mother's primary physician, Luciano said, is not the best available doctor for her condition in this city. There are 2 specialists, one at NYU Langone, one at Columbia. I can make a call. Sophia stared at him. No, she said. He blinked. Very slightly. She suspected very few people said that word to him in this tone. No, I don't want that. It would cost you nothing. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She looked at him directly. She'd gotten better at this at holding eye contact with Luciano Moretti without looking away, which was harder than it had any right to be. The point is that I'm not interested in charity. I'm working for what my mother needs. I'm earning it. And I don't want to owe anyone in this building anything outside of the employment arrangement I came here for. I'm not asking you to owe me anything. Nobody who does a favor without being asked thinks of it as creating a debt. That doesn't mean it isn't one. He was quiet for a moment. You think everything I do has a price attached, he said. Doesn't it? He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression did something she couldn't read closed almost. Like a door pulled most of the way shut before someone decided not to shut it all the way. The Hendricks table? He said finally. Right. She picked up her tray. I'll get their check. She walked away without looking back. Her hands were shaking again. Not the way they had on the first night, not from nerves about the room. From something else entirely. Something she didn't want to examine too closely while she was still standing in it. She got the Hendricks table their check. She kept working. The next morning she went to the hospital and Dr. Patterson, her mother's primary physician, mentioned almost in passing that he'd received a consultation request from a specialist at NYU Langone regarding Elena's case. A Dr. Reyes, Patterson said, flipping through his tablet. Apparently she reviewed the file and had some thoughts on an alternative treatment approach. Do you know how that was arranged? No, Sophia said. But she knew. She absolutely knew. She sat with her mother for 2 hours after the doctor left and said nothing about it. Elena talked about a show she'd been watching on the small television mounted to the hospital room wall about a nurse named Gloria who smuggled in decent coffee about the pigeon that had been sitting on her window ledge every morning for the past week. I named him Gerald, Elena said. You named the pigeon Gerald. He looks like a Gerald. What does a Gerald look like? Reliable, a little tired, doing his best. Sophia laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in what felt like a very long time. Her mother smiled at the sound of it. There she is, Elena said softly. What? My daughter. I haven't heard that laugh in a while. Sophia looked at her hands. It's been a hard few months. I know. Elena reached over and covered Sophia's hand with hers. But something's different today. Something's lighter. I'm fine, Mom. I know you're fine. I'm saying something is different. Elena studied her daughter's face with the particular attention of a woman who had spent 30 years reading third graders and knew what a person looked like when something had shifted inside them. "Is there someone?" "Mom, I'm just asking." "There is no one. There is work, and there is you, and that's the whole list." "All right," Elena said in the tone of a woman who did not believe this but had chosen to let it go for now. Sophia went home. She sat at her kitchen table and thought about the fact that a specialist had reviewed her mother's file without being asked, had called Patterson directly, and had done it in the exact 12 hours since Sophia had told Luciano no. He had done it anyway. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. She did not have his number. She had a shift tomorrow night. She could deal with it then. She sat at the kitchen table for another 20 minutes, turning the shape of this over in her mind. The anger she'd expected to feel, the righteous protective anger that she'd been using as a wall between herself and every complication in her life for the past year, was present, but it was quieter than she'd expected. Underneath it was something she hadn't prepared for. She'd been so certain that everything in this building had a price, that every gesture was calculated, that nothing moved in Luciano Moretti's world without serving an interest somewhere. But Dr. Reyes had called Patterson, and Luciano had never mentioned it, had never circled back to say I did it anyway, had simply done it and said nothing. That wasn't how you built a debt. That was something else. She sat with that for a long time. She didn't confront him directly the next shift. She worked. She watched. She'd been watching Luciano for 7 weeks by this point, in the way she watched everything carefully, without appearing to storing detail with the specific discipline of someone who understood that information was the one resource available to her that didn't cost money. What she'd assembled was a portrait that didn't match the reputation. He did not raise his voice. She had never once heard Luciano Moretti raise his voice at anyone, and in the environment of Velvet Noir, that was remarkable. She'd worked around powerful men who used volume the way other men used fists. Luciano's authority operated entirely in the opposite register. When something needed to be communicated, he communicated it quietly, and everyone in the room adjusted around that quiet, the way you adjusted around a gravitational field, without being asked, without being told. Just because the physics of it demanded it. He was fair with the staff. This surprised her more than it probably should have. The kitchen crew, the bar staff, the security team, he knew their names. Not in the performative way of a manager who'd memorized a list. He knew the barback's mother had been in the hospital. He knew the head of security had a daughter starting college in the fall. He knew these things, and he used the knowledge the way he used everything quietly, without announcement, without expectation. What he was not underneath all of it was easy. He was precise in ways that left no room for error. He was patient in ways that somehow communicated more impatience than impatience itself did. He had the specific quality of a man who had made enormous decisions so many times that ordinary decisions registered to him at a frequency too low to detect. And he was lonely. She hadn't expected to see that. But it was there, if you looked. In the way he moved through rooms full of people who would have done anything to be noticed by him without seeming to actually see any of them. In the way he occupied his office alone after closing while the building emptied around him. In the way on 2 separate nights she'd walked past the private corridor and heard him on the phone speaking in rapid, low Italian that even she, with her non-existent Italian, recognized as an argument with someone he cared about. She turned all of this over in the back of her mind while she worked, while she visited her mother, while she lay in her apartment at 2 a.m, unable to fully sleep. She was building a picture. The picture was becoming more complicated than she'd intended. It happened on a Sunday night. Sundays at Velvet Noir were quieter than weeknights. The particular energy of the city distributed itself differently on the weekend, and the club reflected it. Fewer clients. Lower volume. The kind of evening that felt almost like stillness compared to a Thursday. Sophia was finishing her last section of the night when Diane appeared at her elbow. "He'd like to speak with you," Diane said. No name, no clarification. At Velvet Noir there was only one he. "Now, when you've finished the table." Sophia finished the table. She went to the office. Luciano was behind his desk, and the things on the desk told her he'd been working for a long time. Papers arranged in the specific controlled disorder of ongoing thought. 2 empty cups of espresso, a legal pad covered in handwriting she couldn't read from the doorway. He looked up when she entered. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Dr. Reyes called your mother's physician," he said. "I wanted you to know." She waited. "You told me not to do it," he said. "I did it anyway. I thought you should hear me say that directly." "Why?" she asked. "Because you deserve the honesty." "I meant, why did you do it anyway?" He put down his pen. He looked at her across the desk with that look, the one she still didn't have a clean name for. "Because her condition has a 3-week window in which an adjusted protocol has significantly better outcomes," he said. "And I wasn't going to watch that window close because you were protecting yourself from feeling like you owed me something. You can't just—" "I know," he said it before she could finish. "I know I overstepped. I understand that. But there are things I can do and there are things I won't not do, and those are 2 different categories." The precision of that sentence stopped her. "You should be angry," he added. "I am angry. You don't look angry. I'm managing it." His mouth moved in something that might, in another man, in another situation, have been the beginning of a smile. "I'm not going to keep doing it," he said. "I'm not trying to make decisions for you. I'm not trying to put you in a position where you feel obligated to me. That's not—" He stopped, chose the next words carefully. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He didn't answer immediately. The question sat between them in the quiet office, and she watched him decide how to respond to it. "I don't know," he said finally. The honesty of that landed harder than any smooth answer would have. "Dr. Reyes is good," Sophia said after a moment. "She's the best in the city. If the adjusted protocol makes a difference, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter." "I don't want you to pretend anything." She looked at him, really looked in the way she'd been carefully not fully doing. "You know a lot about me," she said, "and I know almost nothing about you." "That's the nature of the situation." "I know the reputation. I know what people say." "People say a lot of things. They say you're untouchable, that you don't care about anyone, that you could ruin a person's life without—" She stopped. "Without a second thought," he finished. "Yes, I've heard that." "Is it true?" The pause that followed was the most honest thing she'd seen from him yet. "Parts of it used to be true," he said. "Parts of it were never true. Parts of it I made true because it was useful." Another pause. "It's a complicated answer. I didn't ask for a simple one." He looked at her for a moment, that look, that particular quality of attention that she'd spent weeks trying to categorize. "Go home, Ms. Bennett," he said, carefully. There was that word again. She stood up. "Sophia," she said. He looked up. "My name, it's Sophia. You've been calling me Ms. Bennett for 8 weeks. It's fine, but—" She stopped, slightly surprised at herself for having said it. He was quiet for a moment. "Sophia," he said. Just that. Her name, in his voice. Said like it was being placed somewhere specific. She went home. She didn't sleep for a long time. 3 days later, Sophia met Rico. She didn't know his name was Rico when she met him. She found that out later. What she knew in the moment was that he was in a section she didn't usually cover, that someone had seated him in a booth that placed him directly along the path between her station and the bar, and that he had an energy about him that activated every instinct she'd developed from 8 weeks of watching people in this room. He was good-looking in a deliberate way, well-dressed. He smiled too quickly and too fully, and the eyes above the smile were counting things. "Hey." He stopped her as she passed. "I don't think we've met." "I'm on the other section. Can I get someone to help you?" "No, I was going to say you're the one they all talk about, right? The new one." "People talk about everything here," she said. "I'll send your server over." "Luciano's favorite." He said it in the tone of a test. She looked at him directly. "I don't know what you mean. Excuse me." She walked away. She found Diane at the end of the night and described the exchange without theater. Diane's face did something careful. What booth? 14. He came in around 11. Did he say his name? No. Diane absorbed this. You don't need to serve that section. I wasn't. Good. A pause. If he approaches you again, you tell me immediately. Sophia went home that night and lay in the dark thinking about the name she'd heard in the corridor 3 weeks ago. The one she'd repeated to Luciano verbatim. The name from the conversation about Friday, and the shipment and the comment about comfort making a man stupid. Rico. She hadn't made the connection immediately. Now she had. The man in booth 14 was the man who was supposed to betray Luciano, which meant he was here, inside the club, smiling at the floor staff and counting things with his eyes. She sat up, picked up her phone, put it down. She didn't have Luciano's number. She called the club's main line. It went to a recording. She called the number on her pay stub, which connected to an administrative line that rang 7 times and didn't pick up. She lay back down. He knew everything that happened in that building. He had cameras. He had people. He had Diane, who already knew that Rico had been in booth 14. She told herself this. She told herself it was handled. She barely slept. Che. The next morning she went to the hospital and found Dr. Reyes there in person. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, with the focused energy of someone who moved through the world at a specific frequency and expected everything else to keep pace. Ms. Bennett, she said, extending her hand. I'm glad we're finally meeting. I am too, Sophia said, and meant it more than she'd expected to. Dr. Reyes walked her through the adjusted protocol with the methodical clarity of a woman who believed her patients' families deserved real information. The current treatment was slowing the inflammation, but not addressing the underlying trigger. The new approach combined 2 therapies that had shown significant outcomes in recent trials. It was aggressive. It was expensive. Insurance won't cover this, Sophia said flatly. The treatment has already been authorized through a supplemental coverage arrangement, Dr. Reyes said. It's been taken care of. Sophia went very still. What supplemental coverage arrangement? I don't have the specifics of the administrative side. I just know that the treatment is approved and we can begin the new protocol as early as next week if your mother agrees. Sophia sat with this information. She sat with it all the way through Elena's session with Dr. Reyes, during which her mother asked sharp, informed questions that made the doctor look at her with new respect. She sat with it through the lunch she ate mechanically in the hospital cafeteria. She sat with it on the subway home. He had paid for it. Not arranged a doctor. Paid for the entire treatment. The number she was calculating in her head was not a small number. She changed clothes and took the subway back to the meatpacking district, even though she wasn't scheduled to work until the following evening, and she walked to the side entrance and rang the bell. And when the door opened, she said, I need to speak with Luciano. She was put in the office. She waited 11 minutes. When he came in, he was in a suit, and he had the look of a man coming from something rather than going to something slightly less arranged than usual, the quality of someone recently out of a room where difficult things had been decided. Sophia, you paid for my mother's treatment, she said. He sat down across from her rather than behind his desk. That was something. Yes. That is a significant amount of money. Yes. I cannot pay that back. I want to be direct about that. I cannot pay back what that treatment costs. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Nothing. He said it simply, directly, the same way he'd said yes. I'm asking for nothing. Your mother needed treatment. I arranged it. That's the whole of it. People don't do things for nothing. I know you believe that. It's what I've seen. I know what you've seen. His voice was quiet. You've seen people use resources as leverage. You've seen generosity as transaction. You've spent 8 months living in the consequence of a system that only moves when there's an exchange attached. A pause. I'm not asking for an exchange. Why? She demanded. Why would you do this? You don't know me. I've been working in your club for 2 months. I know you gave your last $80 to a boy who needed it. That's not. I know you've worked 2 additional jobs on top of this one for the past 4 months without telling anyone here. How do you... I know you spent 37 minutes crying in a parking garage after a phone call from the hospital 3 weeks ago, and then walked back into your shift and worked the best floor I've seen any server work in 5 years. The silence after that was total. Sophia looked at him. You've been watching me that closely, she said. Yes. For how long? Since the first night. She thought about the balcony, the first shift, the quality of attention she'd felt, and had no way to explain. Why? He took a moment. The kind of moment that meant the answer was real, not rehearsed. Because you were the only person in this room who didn't want anything from me, he said. You didn't know who I was at first. And when you found out, it didn't change how you moved through the room. You were just working. Just doing the work because it mattered to you, because of something that had nothing to do with money or power or what I could give you. He paused. I've been in this world a long time. I haven't seen that before. I wanted the paycheck, she said. I still want the paycheck. I know, that's honest. I respect honest. Another pause. But you came here for your mother, not for yourself. And you gave away money you couldn't afford because a 22-year-old kid was scared. And you told me about Rico when you could have stayed quiet and been safe. He looked at her steadily. I see you, Sophia, the whole picture. And what I see is, I wanted to help, that's all. She sat with that. She sat with the fact that the most dangerous man in the city had just told her he saw her, that he'd been watching from the beginning, that it hadn't been surveillance in the cold calculating sense she'd assumed, that it had been something more like the way you watch a light in a dark room, because it's the only thing that isn't dark. I'm angry about the lack of warning, she said, about being watched without knowing. That's fair. And about the treatment being arranged without asking me first. Also fair. And about the fact that you seem to know more about my life than I've chosen to share with you. Also fair. He paused. Are you done? No. I'm angry about all of that, and I need you to know I'm angry about all of that. She took a breath. And I'm grateful for my mother. And I don't know what to do with being both of those things at the same time. You don't have to do anything with them. That's not how emotions work. I know, I just meant... He stopped, then quietly, you don't have to resolve it right now. You're allowed to be angry and grateful simultaneously. That's not a problem that needs solving today. She looked at him. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Colder, she said. More transactional. Less, she searched for the word. Human, he supplied. I was going to say straightforward. But you meant human. She didn't deny it. He was quiet for a moment. People have been making a particular version of me for a long time. It's easier to be feared than understood. I learned that early. A pause. Most of the time, the version they've made serves a purpose. Sometimes it doesn't. Which is this? He looked at her. I'll let you determine that. She stood up. Her legs felt slightly unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with the hour or the day. Thank you, she said. For my mother. I don't know what else to say, so I'll just say that. It's enough, he said. She left. She walked out into the night air and stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in, and thought about a man who had watched her from a balcony for 2 months and paid for her mother's treatment and told her she didn't have to resolve anything today. She thought about Rico in booth 14. She thought about the name she'd overheard in a corridor and the warning she'd carried to a man she hadn't yet fully understood. She thought about the way Luciano had said, "I see you, Sophia," with the same weight as everything else he said, with that same quiet that was its own kind of gravity. She was in something now. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she knew she had already gone too far to pretend otherwise. She put her hands in her pockets and walked home in the dark, And for the first time in months, the weight of everything she was carrying felt not lighter exactly, but differently distributed. Like something had shifted without her permission. Like the world had rearranged itself slightly while she was standing in an office in the meatpacking district, telling a mafia boss she was angry and grateful at the same time. She didn't fight it, she just walked, and somewhere in that building behind her, she understood. Without turning around, Luciano Moretti was still at his desk in the quiet that surrounded him like a second skin, thinking about whatever it was he thought about when everyone else had left. She hoped for the first time that it wasn't nothing. The new treatment protocol began on a Thursday. Sophia sat in the chair beside her mother's hospital bed and watched Dr. Reyes walk Elena through every step of what was about to happen, and she held her mother's hand, and she didn't think about Luciano Moretti, and she thought about him constantly. Elena squeezed her fingers. "You're somewhere else." "I'm right here." "Your body is. Where's the rest of you?" "Mom, I'm just asking." Elena tilted her head with the particular patience of a woman who had spent a career reading the interior weather of people who thought they were hiding it. "Something happened. Something good happened," Sophia said carefully. "The treatment is happening. That's the thing that matters." "How did the treatment happen?" "Dr. Reyes." "How did we afford the treatment, Sophia?" The room was quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor, a cart rolled past. Someone's monitor beeped twice and settled. "Someone helped," Sophia said. Elena looked at her daughter for a long time. "Someone from the club." "Mom, is it safe?" Sophia thought about the honest answer to that question. She thought about Rico in booth 14. She thought about a conversation in a corridor that she wasn't supposed to have heard. She thought about the word carefully said twice in the dark both times by the same man. "Yes," she said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Elena studied her. Then slowly she lay her head back against the pillow. "Tell me about him." "There's nothing to tell." "Sophia Ann Bennett." "Mom, there is nothing to tell. He's my employer." "Your employer paid for a treatment that cost more than we make in 2 years combined." "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate it for me. I have time." Elena gestured at the IV line with gentle irony. Sophia looked at the ceiling. "He's not what people think he is." "People think something specific about him. People think a lot of specific things about him, and some of them are probably true, and some of them aren't. And I'm still figuring out which is which." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, "You like him." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. You've been sitting in that chair for 40 minutes and I've watched your face do 3 different things every time his name almost comes up." A pause. "It's okay, you know, to like someone." "It's not that simple." "It never is." Elena smiled. "That's what makes it worth something." Sophia didn't answer that. She stayed until visiting hours ended, kissed her mother's forehead, and walked out into the evening feeling like she was carrying something that didn't have a shape yet. She was back at Velvet Noir the following night, and the night after that, and the night after that. The routine had become so familiar that she moved through it on instinct, the rhythm of the room, the timing of the kitchen, the specific needs of each section. She knew the bartender's patterns well enough to anticipate when he was falling behind and adjust the pacing of her orders accordingly. She knew the security rotation. She knew when Diane was in a mood that meant someone had made a mistake upstream and the entire floor needed to perform flawlessly for the next 2 hours. What was different now was Luciano. Not dramatically different. He wasn't suddenly present in the main room every night. He didn't stop her in corridors or appear at her station with conversation. He was as controlled as he'd always been, as contained, as operating at that specific frequency that most people in the room could sense but not quite locate. What was different was smaller than that. When she looked at the balcony, sometimes he was there, and sometimes when she looked, he was already looking at her. And neither of them looked away immediately. A second, 2 seconds, longer than professional, shorter than anything she knew how to name. She kept working. He kept watching. The space between those 2 facts was something she was learning to live inside of. Keg. 11 days after Dr. Reyes began the new protocol, Elena Bennett's inflammation markers dropped for the first time in 7 months. Dr. Reyes delivered this news with the controlled excitement of a scientist who trusted data more than optimism, but was allowing herself just this once to feel both simultaneously. "It's early," she said. "We don't make projections from one data point, but this is a significant early indicator that the treatment is engaging the underlying mechanism the way we hoped." Sophia sat in the hospital hallway afterward and put her face in her hands for 30 seconds. Not crying. Just receiving the information through her whole body, the way information of this magnitude required. Then she sat up straight, wiped her face, and went back to her mother's room. Elena was awake and alert in a way she hadn't been for weeks. The specific kind of alert that meant real energy, rather than the managed wakefulness Sophia had been watching her perform to protect her daughter from worry. "The pigeon came back," Elena said. Gerald. Right on time, 7:15, same ledge." She paused. "I feel different today." "Different how?" "Lighter." "Is that strange?" "It's not strange," Sophia said. Her voice was absolutely steady. "It's good, Mom. It's really good." She told Luciano that night. She didn't plan to. She was walking through the private corridor to collect a liquor order, and he was coming out of the adjacent office, and their paths intersected in the narrow hallway. And before she decided to say it, she said it. The markers dropped. He stopped. She watched something move across his face. Something he didn't have full control of in that unguarded second relief, she thought. Real relief. The kind that came from something actually mattering. "That's good news," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. "It's early. Dr. Reyes was very careful to say it's early." "She's right to be careful." "But it's the first drop in 7 months." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say this next part. "I needed you to know." He looked at her. "Thank you for telling me," he said. They stood there for a moment in the narrow corridor, 2 feet of space between them, the sounds of the club muted on the other side of the wall, and something passed between them that wasn't words. Not yet. Not anything either of them had the language for yet. "Your order's ready at the bar," he said. "I know." She didn't move immediately. "Luciano." "Yes. Thank you. For the treatment. For Dr. Reyes. For..." She stopped, then started again. "For my mother." He held her gaze. "I meant what I said. I'm not asking for anything." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm thanking you." She went to get the order. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. The first time they had a real conversation, not a professional exchange, not a charged corridor moment, but an actual extended conversation, it happened by accident, which was, Sophia would later think, the only way it could have happened. It was a slow Monday. The club closed early. Sophia was the last server finishing her section, and by the time she'd settled her tables and done her end-of-shift tasks, the floor staff had cleared out, and the skeleton night crew had taken over. She was collecting her things from the break room when she passed the door to the private lounge adjacent to Luciano's office, a room she'd been in once briefly when Diane needed her to deliver something, and saw through the partially open door that he was in there, alone. No phone, no paperwork, no subordinates. Just sitting in a chair with a glass of something amber, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who was very tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She kept walking. She made it 4 steps. Then she stopped. She stood in the corridor for a moment, having an internal conversation with herself about every reason this was a bad idea. The list was substantial. She reviewed it thoroughly. Then she went back. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. The tiredness in his face didn't disappear exactly. It shifted, rearranged itself into something more composed, the way his face was always composed. But she'd seen it for a full second before it rearranged, and she wasn't going to pretend she hadn't. "You're still here," he said. Last section took longer. The group in booth 12 ordered dessert at close. She hesitated in the doorway. "Are you all right?" He looked at her. "Why?" Because you're sitting alone after close with a drink and an expression that means something is wrong. I'm asking if you're all right. A pause. Something like surprise moved through his eyes. Not offense. Surprise. As though the question had come in a language he'd forgotten people spoke. Sit down, he said. She sat. What makes you think something is wrong? He asked. You looked tired, not physically. The other kind. The other kind, he repeated. Tired of something that doesn't have a night off. She shrugged slightly. I know what that looks like. I've been looking at it in the mirror for a year. He turned the glass in his hands. There are certain things, he said slowly, that a person does for long enough that they stop being able to tell where the thing ends and the person begins. The empire, she said. I was going to say something more abstract, but yes. How long have you been running this? Depends on what you count as running. I started working in my father's organization when I was 17. Took operational control when I was 26. That's a long time. Long enough that most people can't imagine me as anything else. A pause. Some days I can't either. She looked at him, really looked the way she'd been training herself to look at things without flinching from what she found. What were you before 26? Something changed in his face. Not pain exactly, more like the face of someone deciding whether to open a door that had been closed for a long time. Angry, he said. Scared. Trying very hard to look like neither. What happened? My family. He stopped. Started differently. My father built something real, a community in the oldest sense. People who had nowhere else to go. People the system had decided didn't matter. He protected them in ways that didn't always look like protection from the outside, but were. A pause. When I was 19, a rival organization decided the best way to neutralize my father was through the people he cared about. They went after the community first, then the family. The room was quiet. My mother, he said. My younger sister. They were in the wrong place because someone calculated that they would be. He said it with the flatness of something that had been lived with so long it had calcified into fact. My father survived. He was never the same. I took over because someone had to, and because I understood by then that the only real protection was power. That caring about people without power to back it up was just... He set the glass down. It was just giving someone else a list of your vulnerabilities. Sophia said nothing for a moment. So you became something no one could touch, she said. I became something no one wanted to touch. And it worked. Perfectly. He said it without satisfaction. Nobody has moved against me in 11 years. Nobody has tried to use the people I care about because... He paused. Because they stopped believing there were people I cared about. The implication of that sat in the room between them. Luciano, she said. Yes, you understand that what you just described means you spent 11 years being very effectively, very deliberately alone. He looked at her. Yes. And that worked for you. It was efficient. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Longer. No, he said. It didn't work. It was effective, and it didn't work. Those are two things that can both be true. She leaned forward slightly. What changed? He looked at her steadily. You know what changed. She held his gaze. I'm a waitress. You were never just a waitress. The first night you walked into this room, you were the most determined person in it, and determination that comes from love rather than ambition is... He stopped. It's rare. In this world, it is genuinely rare. She was quiet for a moment. You were watching from the balcony. Yes. And you decided? I decided I wanted to know who you were. A pause. I didn't decide anything after that. Things simply... He looked for the word, progressed. You paid for my mother's treatment, and you call it progressed. The closest thing to a real smile she'd seen on him. Small, controlled, but real. I'm understating it. Significantly. She looked down at her hands for a moment. I need to tell you something. All right. I'm not afraid of you. She looked up. I know I probably should be. I know what you are. I know what this place is. I know what your name means in this city. And I'm choosing to be here. In this room. Having this conversation. A pause. I'm choosing that. I want you to understand that it's a choice. He was looking at her with that look, the complete unguarded version of it, the one she'd been getting glimpses of for months. I understand. Because people around you don't get choices. Or they feel like they don't. And I'm not going to be in that category. I know. I'm going to keep working here, and I'm going to keep earning my salary, and I'm going to watch my mother get better. And I'm going to... She stopped. The next part was harder to say. And I'm going to figure out what this is. What's happening here? But I need you to understand that I'm doing it as myself, not as someone who is grateful or afraid or obligated. Do you understand that? He was quiet for a moment, that stretched long enough to matter. Yes, he said. I understand exactly. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She stood up. Good night, Luciano. Good night, Sophia. She walked out. She was halfway down the corridor before she realized she was smiling. Sure. The next 2 weeks were the most complicated of her life, which was saying something given what the previous year had been. Luciano didn't change his behavior publicly. He was still contained, still controlled, still operating at that frequency of authority that didn't need to announce itself. On the floor, he was her employer. Nothing more, nothing visible. What changed was in private. He started leaving the private lounge door open on the nights she closed. Not always, not every night, but often enough that she understood it was intentional. Sometimes she stopped, sometimes she didn't. When she stopped, they talked. Actual talking, the kind she hadn't done with anyone in years, the back and forth of two people discovering each other's minds at the careful, irregular pace of people who both had reasons to move slowly. She learned that he read voraciously and without pattern. History, philosophy, the occasional terrible crime novel that he was slightly embarrassed about. She learned that he had a specific dry wit that he deployed rarely and always unexpectedly, usually, when she'd stopped anticipating it. She learned that he cooked badly and was unbothered by this. She learned that he had a younger cousin in Naples who called him every Sunday and was the only person in his life who spoke to him without any awareness of what he was because she'd been too young to understand when the family story started. He learned things about her, too. He learned that she'd been accepted to Columbia for graduate school literature and had deferred twice because of her mother's health and was starting to wonder if she'd deferred past the point where the life she'd planned was still possible. He learned that she didn't drink coffee despite having worked in a coffee shop for 3 years. He learned that she was funny in the bone-dry observational way that people were when they'd spent a long time watching things from the outside. He learned that she had a nearly infinite amount of patience for everything except dishonesty, which she recognized with an efficiency that consistently surprised him. You knew Marcus was going to drop that tray before it happened, he said one night. I watched the recording. You were already moving toward him. He was going too fast. He always goes too fast when he's anxious. You could tell that from across the room. I can tell a lot of things from across a room. It's a useful skill when you spend most of your time being invisible. He looked at her. You were never invisible to me. I know, she said. That was interesting, actually. How so? Because I'm good at invisible. I've been practicing it for years, and you saw me anyway. She paused. That was either very flattering or very alarming. I'm still deciding which. What are you leaning toward? Tonight, flattering. A pause. Ask me tomorrow. He smiled. The real one. She'd been collecting the real ones the way she collected things she couldn't afford to lose. Then Rico came back. Not in a booth this time. Not as a client. He came back with a face Sophia recognized and a story she could already tell was constructed. One of the cocktail servers mentioned that a man had been asking questions about the staff schedule, about which servers closed, which nights, about whether the blonde woman who worked Tuesdays was still there or had she moved sections. Sophia heard this secondhand through Marcus, who'd heard it from the cocktail server who'd mentioned it while they were all in the break room before their shifts. She went directly to Diane. "Someone was asking about my schedule," she said. Diane looked at her. "Where did you hear this?" Maria told Marcus. "A man came in last Wednesday during the early shift." Diane's expression closed in the specific way it closed when she was calculating the distance between what she knew and what she could say. "What man?" "I don't know his name." This was technically true. "I know he came to booth 14 3 weeks ago, and you told me to stay away from that section." Diane stood up. "Wait here." She came back 12 minutes later. "You're on a different shift rotation starting tomorrow. Different nights. I'll handle the explanation to the rest of the floor. Diane, tell me what's happening." "The less you know. The less I know, the less prepared I am." Sophia kept her voice level. "I've been in this building for 3 months. I've been careful. I've been professional. I have respected every boundary of this place. I'm asking you to give me enough information to protect myself." A long pause. "There are people," Diane said carefully, "who have decided that the best way to reach certain parties is through the people around them. You have become visible. That creates a particular kind of risk." "Because of Luciano." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Sophia absorbed this. "What do I need to do?" "Show up for your new shift. Don't vary your route to work. Don't be alone outside the building. That's it. That's what you need for now." Diane looked at her steadily. "Sophia, you've been exceptional. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that." A pause. "Stay inside the building's protections. Don't go around them. Do you understand?" "Yes," Sophia said. She understood. She also understood that the building's protections had a name, and that name had told her twice to go home carefully, and that the reason for that word had just gotten significantly more concrete. She went to tell Luciano. She went to the office directly after speaking to Diane and knocked, and didn't wait to be invited in, which she'd learned he found slightly startling and had never once objected to. He was on the phone. He held up one finger, finished the call in 30 seconds in a voice that meant the conversation was over regardless of what the other person wanted, and put the phone down. "Rico was asking about my schedule," she said. Luciano didn't move. His face didn't change. But something behind his eyes did a shift of attention, so complete and so rapid that it was almost physical. "When?" "Last Wednesday during the early shift. He was asking one of the cocktail servers which nights I close." He reached for his phone. "Diane already moved my rotation," Sophia said. He put the phone down. "I know, I approved it 30 seconds ago." He looked at her. "How did you hear about this? Does that matter?" "No." He stood up. "Who did he speak to?" "Maria, the cocktail server on the early Tuesday shift." He moved toward the door. "Go back to the floor." "Luciano?" He stopped. "He's looking for me because of you," she said. "I need you to say it out loud." He turned. His face was very controlled and very still, but underneath the control there was something she'd only seen glimpses of before, something that looked in this unguarded half-second a lot like fear. Not for himself. "Yes," he said. "And you knew there was a risk. You knew it when you first started watching me, when you arranged the treatment, when you—" "I knew there was a risk," he said. "I was managing it. I'm managing it. This is—" He stopped, took a breath. "I would not have let this reach you. It has reached me. Sophia, I'm not angry." She meant it. "I'm not afraid. I'm telling you what's happening, so we're dealing with it together. Not so you can manage it alone and expect me not to notice." She met his eyes. "I'm not one of the things in this building you operate. I'm a person in the situation with you. Is that clear?" The look on his face in that moment was something she'd never seen on him before. Not surprise. Not the flat calculation. Something open. Something that had been forced open the way a window was forced open in a room that had been sealed too long. "Clear," he said. His voice had a different quality to it. Lower. "Yes, that's clear." She held his gaze for one more second. "Go do what you need to do," she said. "I'm going back to the floor." She turned and walked out. She was shaking slightly as she walked. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. The recognition of standing in the middle of something real and choosing to stay standing in it, rather than running, and the way that choice felt not safe, not comfortable, but absolutely certain. Luciano dealt with the Rico situation in the next 48 hours in a way that Sofia was deliberately not given details about, because she'd asked to be informed, not briefed on operations, and he'd respected that distinction with the precision he applied to everything. What she knew was that Rico did not return to Velvet Noir. What she knew was that 3 people in Luciano's inner circle were quietly removed from their positions over the following week, and that the club operated with a different arrangement of its security personnel in the days that followed. What she knew was that on the Thursday night after Rico stopped being a visible threat, Luciano appeared at the edge of her section at the end of her shift with his jacket over his arm and said, "Walk you out." She looked at him. "The staff exit," she said. "Yes." "You don't typically." "No," he agreed. "I don't." She collected her things. He walked her to the staff exit, and then a block further to the corner where she normally caught the subway. He didn't touch her. He didn't say much. He walked at the pace she walked, and stayed at her left where the street traffic came from, the way men who'd grown up being taught to shield people walked. At the corner she stopped. "I'm all right from here," she said. "I know." "You don't have to." "I know that too." He stopped, looked at her in the yellow light of the street and the cold air of the New York night. "I wanted to." She looked at him. The man who had terrified an entire city for 11 years. Standing on a street corner in the meatpacking district with his jacket over his arm in the cold because he wanted to walk her to the subway. "You are nothing like what I expected," she said. "You've said that before." "It keeps being true." He looked at her. Steady. Present. The way he always was. "Sofia." "Yes. I need you to understand something." He chose his words with the same care he applied to everything. "The situation with Rico is resolved. But there are people in this world who will always look for leverage. That's not going to stop. And you," he paused, "you have become relevant to me, in a way that people notice, and that will not change either." "What are you telling me?" "I'm telling you the truth. All of it. Because you asked me to be honest with you, and I intend to be even when the honest thing is—" He stopped. "Complicated. You're telling me that being around you is dangerous." "Yes." "And you're telling me this so I can make a choice." "Yes." She thought about her mother in a hospital bed, about Elena's inflammation markers dropping, about Gerald the pigeon on the windowsill every morning at 7:15, about the sound of her mother's laugh when Sofia had told her about it. She thought about a man who said carefully and meant it, about an open office door and terrible crime novels and a cousin in Naples who called every Sunday. She thought about the version of herself who had applied to Columbia for graduate school, who had plans that looked like a straight line from one thing to the next. She thought about standing in a hospital corridor at midnight with $31 in her bank account and clicking apply. "I'm already in the choice," she said. "I made it when I stayed, when I told you about Rico the first time." She paused. "I'm making it again now." He was very still. "You understand what that means," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm working on it," she said. "I understand enough." He nodded, very slightly. "Go home," he said. The word was loaded with something heavier than dismissal, warmer. "I know," she said, carefully. She turned and walked into the subway entrance and did not look back. She didn't need to. She could still feel the specific quality of his attention on her back as she went down the stairs, that focused, unwavering thing that had no name she'd found yet, but that she was no longer trying to walk away from. She was in it, whatever it was. She was in it now. And underneath the complexity, underneath the fear and the risk and the weight of all the things that could go wrong in a world like this, underneath all of it, was something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She was certain, not of the outcome, not of what happened next, but of herself, standing in the middle of it, eyes open, choosing to stay. That certainty was something no amount of money had ever given her. It had come from somewhere else entirely. The certainty lasted 4 days. Then everything broke open. It started small, the way the worst things always did, not with an explosion, but with a detail that didn't fit. A Tuesday night mid-shift, when Sophia noticed that 2 of the security personnel who'd been part of the regular rotation since her first week were no longer in their usual positions. She noticed because she'd trained herself to notice the same way she noticed when a table's energy changed, or when the kitchen was running behind. Small signals that most people filtered out because they weren't looking for them. She didn't say anything. She kept working. By 10 o'clock, she'd noticed 3 more things that were wrong. The inner corridor that ran behind the private offices, the one that was always without exception, staffed by at least one of Luciano's people, after 9 p.m. was empty. She'd walked past it twice on her way to the service station, and both times there was nobody there. The camera positioned above the East VIP entrance, she'd been aware of it since her second week. The slight angular shift of it, when someone important entered the section, was not moving. It was static, fixed in place. And Diane had not been on the floor since 8:30. Sophia set her tray down at the service station and stood very still for 10 seconds. She thought about what Luciano had told her on the street corner, about people who looked for leverage, about the fact that the Rico situation being resolved didn't mean it was finished. It meant the first move had been blocked, which in a game like this typically preceded a second move. She picked up her tray. She walked to the bar, ordered the drinks for her section with the same efficiency she always did, and while she waited, she leaned slightly toward the bartender. A man named Daniel, who had been at Velvet Noir for 7 years and who Sophia had learned was one of the more reliable indicators of the building's internal weather. "Where's Diane?" she asked conversationally. Daniel didn't look at her. He kept building the drinks. "Out." "She's never out mid-shift without telling the floor." A pause. He set a glass down carefully. "Keep your section running. Don't ask questions tonight." He looked at her then, direct. "Go straight to the back exit when your shift ends. Not the staff exit you usually use. The back one. You understand?" "Daniel, do you understand?" "Yes," she said. She took her tray and went back to the floor. She was running calculations the entire time she moved from table to table, keeping her face neutral and her movements unhurried and her service flawless. Someone had moved the security rotation. Someone had killed the camera. Diane was missing. And Daniel, who never volunteered anything, had just told her to use the back exit with the specific tone of someone delivering a warning they'd been asked to deliver. Someone had told Daniel to tell her that, which meant someone was aware that she might be in a specific kind of danger tonight and had routed the information to her through the most innocuous possible channel. That someone was Luciano. Which meant Luciano already knew something was wrong. Which meant whatever was happening tonight, he was inside it rather than above it, and the instruction to use the back exit was his way of keeping her out of the middle. She spent the next hour performing the best shift of her professional life and being more frightened than she'd been since the night she'd sat in the hospital corridor with $31 in her account. She didn't let the fear reach her face. She'd been managing the gap between interior and exterior for long enough that it was almost automatic. Almost. At 11:45, Marcus appeared at her elbow. He was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. "Something's happening in the back," he said very quietly. "One of the kitchen guys said there are people in the loading area who shouldn't be there." "How many people?" He didn't say. Is anyone hurt? I don't know. Sophia thought for exactly 3 seconds. Get everyone from the floor staff and tell them there's a gas concern in the kitchen and we're doing a precautionary evacuation through the front. Don't use the word emergency. Don't run. Just move everyone out through the front entrance and keep them on the street. What, Sophia? I can't just... Marcus. She looked at him directly. Do you trust me? Yes, but... Then do it, right now. Go. He went. She watched him move across the floor and speak quietly to the other servers. Watched the subtle shift as the information passed through the staff. Watched people begin the calibrated movement toward the front of the building. The clients noticed nothing. The transition was smooth enough to read as logistical rather than urgent. She did not go toward the front. She went toward the back. She knew it was the wrong move. She knew it while she was making it. She made it anyway. The private corridor was still empty, but the far door, the one that connected to the secondary hallway behind the offices, was open. Not wide. 3 inches, which in a building where doors were always closed was the equivalent of a signal. She pushed it open. She heard the voices before she saw anything. 2 of them. Low and urgent in a register that meant the conversation happening was not one anyone was supposed to hear. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door and listened. Needs to happen before the hour's up. After that, the window closes. He's not in the office. I checked twice. He's somewhere in the building. He always stays until 2. The woman... She stopped breathing. Already moved to the back section. They'll take her when she uses the exit. Massetti wants her unharmed. Massetti wants leverage. Unharmed is relative. Sophia took one very controlled breath. They were not talking about Luciano. They were talking about using her to get to Luciano. Massetti. That was a name she hadn't heard before. Not Rico's network, someone above it. Someone who had watched Rico fail and decided to escalate. Someone who understood that the back exit instruction was going to bring her directly to where they were waiting. Luciano had told Daniel to send her to the back exit, which meant either Luciano didn't know what was waiting at the back exit, or someone had intercepted his instruction and turned it into a trap, or, and this was the one that landed in her chest, like something cold. Someone inside the building had passed information to Massetti about how Luciano would try to protect her. She moved. She went back the way she'd come through the private corridor, and instead of going toward the front of the building where the staff had evacuated, she went up. The service stairs that she'd used twice on private event nights, the ones that led to the upper-level storage, and the private rooms that Luciano sometimes used for meetings that weren't held in his office. She took the stairs 2 at a time. She had no phone signal in the stairwell. She knew that from the first week. She got to the upper level and pushed through the door and walked fast down the corridor and knocked on the first door, which was locked, and the second, which was also locked, and the third. The third opened before she finished knocking. Luciano looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. It wasn't his controlled face. It wasn't the careful authority. It was the raw, stripped version of a man who had just run through a rapid sequence of very bad possibilities and had not finished running through them. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low and sharp. "I told Daniel to send you to the back exit is a trap," she said. "There are at least 2 of them in the secondary hallway. They're waiting for me. They said Massetti wants leverage." The name landed. She watched it land. His face didn't do the thing she expected. She expected the contained, calculating response, the quick assessment, the pivot toward solution. What she saw instead was something that moved through him faster and more deeply than calculation. A kind of fury that came from a specific source, the kind that was really fear redirected. "How did you hear that?" he said. "I went toward the voices instead of away from them." "I told you. You told me to go to the back exit, and I overheard 2 men discussing that they were waiting for me there. Going toward the voices was the correct decision." He stared at her. There was another man in the room she hadn't seen immediately, one of Luciano's inner circle. A man named Costa, who she'd learned was closest to him operationally. Costa was on a phone speaking fast in a voice too low to catch. Secondary hallway, Luciano said to Costa, without looking away from Sofia. Costa related into the phone. Luciano took 2 steps toward her and stopped, as though he'd started moving on instinct and caught himself. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, I'm fine." "You went toward them." "I know." "Sofia." "I know." She said again more quietly. "I know it wasn't smart. But the alternative was walking directly into what they had arranged, which was also not smart. I made the best available choice." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," he said. "You made the right call." "I know I did." She kept her voice even. "What is Maschetti?" He was quiet for a moment. Costa had moved to the far side of the room, still on the phone, managing whatever was happening below, in a low, rapid exchange she couldn't follow. "Maschetti is someone I have been in conflict with for 2 years, Luciano said. "A man who controls a significant portion of the East Coast import network. Someone who decided approximately 8 months ago that the best way to consolidate his position was to remove mine. And he couldn't do it directly. He couldn't do it directly because direct confrontation with me carries costs he's not willing to pay. He's been looking for another method. And now he thinks I'm that method. He watched what happened with Rico. He drew conclusions. How does he know about me specifically?" Luciano didn't answer immediately. "He knows because someone inside this building told him," he said. "Someone who has been feeding information to his network for an unknown period of time." The room went very still. "Inside this building," Sofia said. "Yes." "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for 3 weeks. I've known for certain for the past 6 hours." "Who?" He held her gaze. "I'll deal with it." "Luciano." "Who?" A pause. "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is, tell me who." He looked at her. "Then, Morales, one of the private event coordinators. He's been with us for 4 years." She thought about Morales. She'd barely interacted with him, a quiet man mid-40s who managed the private dining bookings and rarely came to the main floor. She'd had no reason to look at him twice. "He knew about the back exit instruction," she said. "He passed it to Massetti's people." "Yes." "Which means he knew what you told Daniel." "Yes." A muscle in Luciano's jaw moved. "Which means he's had access to my internal communications." Costa turned from the far side of the room. "Teams at the secondary entrance. 2 contained, 1 ran. We're tracking." "Morales," Luciano said. "In custody downstairs." Sofia exhaled. She hadn't fully realized she was holding her breath until the exhale. Luciano crossed the room toward her in 3 steps. He stopped close. Close enough that she could see clearly everything his face was doing, and his face was doing things she'd never seen it do. "I need you to hear me," he said. His voice had dropped to something she'd never heard from him. Something that stripped out the authority entirely and left something much more unguarded. "I'm hearing you," she said. "I made a mistake. Multiple mistakes." He said it with the directness she'd come to expect from him, but there was something underneath it tonight that was different. "I knew Maschetti was watching. I knew there was an internal risk. I kept it managed rather than eliminating it, because eliminating it required a move I wasn't ready to make. I prioritized the operational consideration over the personal one. And because of that, you were in danger tonight." She looked at him. "I'm not in danger. You were. I handled it." "That's not—" He stopped. "You shouldn't have had to handle it. That is not what I wanted for you. This is not the situation I intended you to be in." She looked at him for a long moment. "Luciano," she said, "I'm a grown woman who made an informed choice to be in this building and in your life, knowing what that meant. I told you that on a street corner 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to let you take ownership of what happened tonight as though I'm a consequence of your decisions, rather than a person making my own. You could have been hurt. I wasn't. This time, she agreed. And I'll deal with next time when there is one." She held his gaze. "Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" Like I'm something that broke. Something shifted in him. She watched it shift, something loosening in the area around his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the way he was holding himself against the weight of what had just happened. "You're not broken," he said. "No, I'm not." He reached up then, slowly giving her every opportunity to step back, and put his hand against the side of her face. His palm was warm. His eyes were for the first time since she'd known him completely unguarded. "I don't know how to do this," he said, quietly, just to her. "Do what?" "This. Care about someone and not—" He stopped. "The last time I cared about people, I turned it into a fortress. I built walls around everything that mattered until it stopped mattering, until there was nothing left that anyone could reach." "I know," she said. "You told me. And then you walked into my building. And you watched me from the balcony, and I couldn't stop watching." His thumb moved very slightly against her cheekbone. "I've been trying to protect you in the only way I know how to protect things, by controlling the environment around you, by managing the threats, by not—" He exhaled. "By not letting you see how much you matter, because if nobody sees it, it's not a vulnerability." "But I saw it anyway," she said. "Yes. Because you paid for my mother's treatment." "Before that," he said. "You saw it before that." She had. She'd seen it in a corridor when she'd said 6 as of yesterday and watched something move through his expression that he hadn't controlled in time. She'd seen it in the way he said carefully. She'd seen it in the open office door and the Sunday nights and the terrible crime novels. "I know what I'm walking toward," she said. "I've known for a while. It's not a simple life. I don't have a simple life now. It's dangerous. Tonight was the most dangerous thing that's happened to me. I went toward the voices and came up the stairs and knocked on doors. I'm still here." He looked at her. "You are nothing like anyone I've ever known." "Good," she said. "I don't want to be." He leaned forward and touched his forehead to hers very gently. That was all. That was the whole of it. Forehead to forehead, eyes closed, the particular intimacy of two people standing in the middle of a very difficult night and choosing to be present in it together rather than apart. She let her eyes close. She could feel him breathing. After a moment, he pulled back just far enough to look at her. "Costa is going to take you somewhere safe tonight," he said. "Not the hospital, not your apartment. Somewhere I know is clean. I need to deal with what's happening downstairs." "I know. Tomorrow we need to have a real conversation. About Massetti. About what this means going forward. About what I'm going to need to do. And what that means for you." "I know," she said again. "None of it is simple." "I know that too." He looked at her for one more moment. "Are you scared?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "And no. It's like what I said about being angry and grateful at the same time. I'm scared, and I'm sure, both at once." He nodded, very slowly, like that answer was the one he'd been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. "Costa," he said without raising his voice. Costa appeared at his side with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. "Take Sofia," Luciano said. "The Mercer property. Tell Antoni she's under full protection." "Yes." Costa looked at Sofia. "Ms. Bennett." Sofia looked at Luciano. "Deal with it," she said. Not a request. A statement of faith. His eyes held hers. "I will." She followed Costa out. Sad. The Mercer property was an apartment 3 miles away that felt like a different world from everything she'd come from. Quiet, clean, with the specific expensive simplicity of a space maintained for function rather than show. Costa introduced her to a woman named Vera, who brought her tea without being asked and didn't try to make conversation, which was the right call. Sofia sat at a small table with the tea and her hands wrapped around the warm cup and let herself be still for the first time in several hours. She thought about everything that had happened in a single evening. The security shift, the static camera, The voices in the corridor, the name Machete, the hand against her face, and the forehead pressed to hers, and the way Luciano's voice had gone to that unguarded, stripped-down register that she understood was something he gave to almost nobody. She thought about her mother, who was asleep in a hospital bed with Gerald the pigeon's window ledge empty for the night, with better inflammation markers than 7 months ago, with Dr. Reyes's protocol running through her system and doing what the old protocol couldn't. She thought about what Luciano had said. "It's dangerous." And what she'd said back. "I know." She'd meant it when she said it. She still meant it now, sitting in a safe apartment at 1 in the morning with tea going cold in her hands. But meaning something and being unafraid of it were different things. She was not unafraid. She'd been honest about that too, and the honesty of it was something she was going to have to carry forward into whatever came next. She called the hospital. The night nurse answered, a woman named Gloria, who she'd spoken to enough times that Gloria recognized her voice immediately. "She's sleeping," Gloria said. "Good vitals, quiet night." "Okay, thank you." "You all right, honey? You sound—" "I'm fine," Sophia said. "Just checking in." She put the phone down. She thought about the conversation Luciano had said they needed to have tomorrow, the real one, about Machete and what came next and what it meant. She knew some of what it meant. She'd known since she'd made the choice on the street corner. Some things, when you named them, stopped being theoretical. Luciano Moretti was a man in a dangerous world with dangerous enemies, and she had become the person he cared about in a way that made her visible to those enemies, and that was not going to change because of one night of handled threats. It was going to be a permanent condition. She could leave. She sat with that honestly. She could stop working at Velvet Noir. She could walk away from this specific, complicated, impossible thing that had started growing between her and a man who watched her from balconies and paid for her mother's treatment and read terrible crime novels and had spent 11 years turning himself into a fortress. She could leave. Her mother would still have Dr. Reyes's protocol. The treatment was arranged and paid for. Elena would be okay. Sophia could find another job, a safe one, a simple one, and build back toward the life she'd deferred and planned and wanted before everything derailed. She could leave. She sat with it for a long time, the honest consideration of it, not as an impulse or a fear response, but as a genuine option on the table. Then, she thought about a man's forehead pressed to hers in a room where something difficult had just happened, and his voice saying, "I don't know how to do this," and the way he'd said it, not as defeat, but as the most honest thing a person could say when they were in the middle of learning something real. She thought about the version of Luciano she'd been assembling over 4 months. The precision and the dry wit and the cousin in Naples who called every Sunday. The man who knew his barback's mother was in the hospital, and his security chief's daughter was starting college. The man who had built a fortress around himself after losing people he loved, and had maintained that fortress with perfect efficiency for 11 years, until a 25-year-old waitress walked in and started paying attention. She thought about herself too. Who she'd been when she walked into Velvet Noir, exhausted, desperate, using every calorie of her energy on her mother and leaving nothing for anything else. And who she was now, still fighting for her mother, still doing the work, but somehow also more alive than she'd been in years. More present. More certain of herself. That hadn't happened in a vacuum. She put her cup down. She was not leaving. She'd known that before she'd started the consideration, but she needed to run through it honestly to be sure, and now she was sure. She lay down on the couch in the quiet of the safe apartment and looked at the ceiling and said very quietly to the room, "Okay, so this is the life." Not a complaint. Not a resignation. A fact said in the tone of someone who has looked at their life clearly and chosen it. She closed her eyes. She thought about Luciano dealing with whatever was happening in the building she'd just left, making the hard moves he needed to make in the only way he knew how, and coming out the other side of it because he always came out the other side. She thought about morning, about the conversation that was coming, about what she was going to say. She knew some of it already. She knew she was going to tell him that she wasn't a liability to be managed. That she wasn't going to live inside his protections the way a valuable object lived inside a safe. That she was in this with him, which meant she was a participant, not a protected party. That the way to keep her safe was not to control the environment around her, but to trust her to handle what came at her, which she had already demonstrated she could do. She was going to say all of that. And then she was going to say something else. Something that had been true for longer than she'd been willing to say it out loud. She was going to say, "I'm not going anywhere." And she was going to mean it the way she meant everything completely, with her eyes open, knowing what she was choosing. She fell asleep before she finished planning the sentence. But the sentence was already there, waiting for morning. Waiting for the man who had spent 11 years not knowing someone could choose him without being afraid. Waiting to be said out loud, which was the only way things became real. She woke at 6:15 to the sound of her phone. Not an alarm, an actual call. The number was one she didn't recognize, and for a half second, the events of the previous night compressed into her chest all at once. The static camera, the voices in the corridor, Machete's name said in the dark, and she was fully awake before the second ring finished. "Yes," she said. "It's Luciano." The relief was immediate and involuntary. She sat up on the couch and pressed her hand flat against her sternum, as though that would slow the heartbeat. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes, everything is handled." A pause. "I wanted you to hear that before anything else." "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, what happened?" "Machete's people are no longer a concern. Morales has been dealt with. The security gaps have been closed." He said it with the same directness he applied to everything, but underneath the information. She could hear something, not exhaustion exactly, but the particular quality of a man who had been awake all night doing things that cost him in ways he didn't account for out loud. "And Machete himself. We need to talk about that in person." A pause. "Can you come to the club, not to work? I need to speak with you." "Yes," she said. "Give me an hour." She showered and dressed in the clothes Vera had produced without explanation, her size simple, which raised a question she decided to table for now, and drank the coffee that was waiting in the kitchen, and told herself she was ready for whatever the conversation was going to be. She was mostly telling the truth. Luciano was in the private lounge when she arrived, not the office. She noted that. The office was where he managed things. The lounge was where he'd been sitting alone with a glass of scotch the first night she'd walked past and then walked back. The choice of room was its own kind of statement. He looked like a man who had been through a long night. Not undone, Luciano was never undone, but there was a quality to him that she recognized now as the version of him that existed before the control fully assembled. He was in a shirt, no jacket. There were 2 cups of coffee on the table. He looked at her when she came in, and something in his face settled in a way she'd learned to read as relief. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He pushed one of the cups toward her. She picked it up and drank and waited. "Machete," he said, "is not finished. I want to be direct about that." "I assumed." Rico was his opening move. The plant inside the building was his second. Last night was his third. Luciano held his cup in both hands and looked at it. He is a patient man who operates by attrition. He will keep looking for pressure points until he finds one that works or until it costs him more than the outcome is worth. "And we need to make it cost more than the outcome is worth," she said. He looked up. "We." "That's what I said." A pause. "Sophia, we had a version of this conversation on a street corner. We had another version last night. I'm going to save us both time and tell you that my answer is the same as it was in both of those conversations, which is that I'm here, I'm in this, and I'm not managing the danger by leaving it." She held his gaze. "What I am going to do is be honest with you about everything, which is what I need from you in return. I've been honest with you. You told me Machete was a concern 3 weeks after you knew about him." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Why did you wait?" "Because I was—" He stopped, started again. "Because I was trying to resolve it without it becoming something you had to carry. The same reason I dealt with Rico before telling you the full picture. The same pattern. His jaw tightened slightly. I understand that the pattern is wrong. The pattern puts me in the position of being protected from information I need to make real choices. That's not protection, that's control. I know. Do you? He set his cup down. Yes, genuinely. I've been doing it my entire life, managing the information around the people I care about, because I've understood since I was 19 years old that caring about people in this world makes them targets. The reflex is to minimize the visible connection, to manage the threat by managing the information. And it doesn't work, she said. Because Massetti knew anyway. Because the connection was visible regardless of what you did or didn't tell me. Yes? He looked at her steadily. And because the cost of that approach is exactly what you described. I treat the people I care about as variables to be protected, rather than as people who are inside the situation with me. And that... He paused. That is what I have been doing to you, and I'm sorry for it. The apology landed cleanly. No performance in it, no diplomatic softening. Just the direct, unguarded acknowledgement of a man who had figured something out through a long night and was saying it the only way he knew how. Okay, she said. Thank you. That's it? Did you want more? I expected an argument. You agreed with me. There's nothing to argue. She looked at him. What are we doing about Massetti? He blinked slightly, the tell she'd found for genuine surprise. You want the operational picture? I want to know what I'm living inside, yes, he told her. He told her the actual shape of the Massetti conflict, not the edited version, not the managed information. All of it. The timeline, the business stakes, the specific nature of what Massetti was trying to consolidate, and why Luciano's position blocked it. The 2 years of pressure. The series of escalating moves. The reason last night had been the most direct strike yet, and what that escalation meant going forward. She listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions at precise moments that told him she was tracking it completely, not the surface, the structure underneath. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He's going to come at you through someone else now, she said. Not me directly. The back exit trap failed. He knows you're watching for that approach. He'll pivot. Yes. Who else is visible? Who else has he identified as someone you care about? The question made his eyes do something. You're thinking like... I'm thinking like someone who is trying to understand a threat. Who else? He considered. My cousin in Naples is too far removed and too unknown. Costa is... He paused. Costa is not vulnerable in that way. There are people within the organization, but they're protected by the organization itself. Then he's going to try to go under you rather than around you. Attack the structure rather than the person. She paused. He's going to go after the businesses. Luciano looked at her with an expression that was almost something she'd never seen on him before. Not quite surprise. Something more like discovery. The look of a person encountering something unexpected in a place they thought they knew well. How did you... It's what I would do, she said. If I couldn't reach the person through what they loved, I'd try to take away what they built. Make the cost of maintaining their position higher than the position is worth. She paused. That's what he's calculating, isn't it? Yes, Luciano said slowly. That is exactly what he's calculating. So the answer is to make the position non-negotiable, make the cost of attacking it prohibitive, not through force. She stopped, reconsidered. Or not through force alone, through consolidation. Whoever has been neutral in this conflict, you need them not to be neutral. He was looking at her with full, undivided attention. The complete version. You're describing a political move. I'm describing the only move that ends this without a cycle that keeps escalating. She met his eyes. You've been fighting this as a power conflict. But it's really a legitimacy conflict. Massetti's position depends on enough people believing you're vulnerable. The moment that stops being credible, the calculus changes. The room was very quiet. How long have you been thinking about this? He asked. Since you told me about the Rico situation. I've been, I think, in these terms. It's how I've managed things for the past year. You have what you have, and you figure out how to make it enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly, "You are remarkable." "I'm practical," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She looked down at her coffee cup, looked back up. "What are you going to do?" "Exactly what you described," he said. "I've been moving toward it for 3 months. You just articulated the end state more clearly than I had. You were already on this. Not completely. I'd been thinking about force first, legitimacy second. You inverted it." A pause. "You're right that it's the better sequence." She sat with that for a moment. The strange, slightly vertiginous feeling of having had a real strategic conversation with Luciano Moretti about his empire sitting at a table in his private lounge at 7:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee, the way two people talked through problems when they were actually genuinely inside the same situation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Last night, when Costa said 2 contained 1 ran, what does contained mean?" He looked at her steadily. "It means they are no longer operating." "That's not a specific answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." She thought about this. She thought about who Luciano was and who he had to be to maintain what he maintained in a city like New York, in a world like his. She thought about the 19-year-old boy who had lost his mother and his sister and built a fortress from the grief. She thought about 11 years of decisions made in rooms she would never see, for reasons she would never fully know. She thought about what she could live with. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what world you operate in," she said. "I know. I've known since the beginning, and I've been here anyway." A pause. "What I need from you going forward is this: the decisions you make, I don't need the details, but I need to know when they affect our life, when they change what I need to be aware of, when the risk level shifts." She paused. "Can you give me that?" "Yes," he said, no hesitation. "And I need you to stop managing my information. Treat me like someone who is in this with you." "Yes. And—" She stopped. "And," he prompted, "and I need you to understand that I'm not leaving." She said it the way she'd practiced it in the safe apartment at 1 in the morning, directly with her eyes open, knowing what she was choosing. "Not because I'm afraid to, not because I owe you anything, because I'm choosing this, because I'm choosing you." She held his gaze. "I needed you to hear me say it out loud." The thing that happened to his face in the following seconds was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. It was not a dramatic thing, no tears, no overwhelmed expression. It was quieter than that. It was the face of a man who had built every wall he had for 11 years to protect himself from exactly the thing she had just said, and who was discovering in real time that he did not want the wall anymore. He reached across the table and took her hand. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. 3 weeks later, Elena Bennett's inflammation markers dropped again. Dr. Reyes delivered the results in person, which Sophia had learned was something the doctor only did when the news was significant enough to warrant the effort. "The underlying trigger is responding to the adjusted protocol," Dr. Reyes said, and her voice had that quality of controlled excitement again, the scientist allowing herself carefully to feel what the data was saying. "The second set of labs confirms it's not a fluctuation. This is a consistent directional change." Elena was sitting up in bed. She'd been sitting up more. The tiredness that had lived in her face for 7 months had started to lift at the edges the way a sky began to change color before you could actually call it dawn. "What does that mean for the timeline?" Sophia asked. "It means we're talking about discharge planning. Not immediately, but in weeks, not months." Elena looked at her daughter. Sophia looked at her mother. There were no words for what passed between them in that moment. It wasn't a single emotion. It was the entire year compressed into one exchange. The $31, the hospital corridor, the billing administrator with the kind face, the 2 a.m. shifts, and the sold record player, and the morning visits before work, all of it contained in one look between two people who understood what the other had carried. "Gerald is going to have to share the ledge," Elena said. Sophia laughed. The real laugh, the one her mother had said she hadn't heard in a while. Elena smiled. Then she looked at her daughter with the specific attention of a woman who had been watching carefully for months. "He was here yesterday." Sophia stilled. "Who was the man? Your employer?" Elena said the last word with gentle, knowing emphasis. "He came in the afternoon. He brought flowers, which tells me he knows absolutely nothing about hospital rooms, but the intention was correct." Sophia stared at her mother. "Luciano came here. He sat with me for 40 minutes. We talked." Elena paused. "He's not what I expected." "Nobody ever says that and then stops there." "He's serious," Elena said. "Serious in the way that people are when they've had to be for a long time. But underneath," she tilted her head. "He asked me about the choir, asked me what songs I liked best, wanted to know what I taught in my classroom, what my students were like." She paused. "He was asking because he genuinely wanted to know, not to make conversation, to know." Sophia sat very still. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him everything. I'm a talker, you know that." Elena smiled. "I told him about the year I had a student who couldn't read at grade level, and we spent the whole year working on it. And at the Christmas concert, he read the introduction himself in front of everyone, and the whole auditorium. I told him that story." "What did he say?" Elena looked at her daughter for a moment. "He said that was the most valuable thing a person could do. Help someone find out what they were capable of." A pause. "And then he was quiet for a little while. And then he said very quietly that your mother had done that for you." The room was very still. "He said that," Sophia said. "He said that." Elena's eyes were soft. "I liked him, Sophia. I want you to know, whatever else he is, whatever complicated things surround him, I liked the man who sat in that chair yesterday." She paused. "He loves you." He didn't say it, but it was in every sentence. Sophia looked at the window. Gerald's ledge was empty this time of day. He came in the mornings. "I know," she said. "Do you love him?" She turned back to her mother. She thought about a street corner in the cold, about a forehead pressed to hers in a difficult room, about a table with 2 cups of coffee and an honest conversation that changed the shape of everything, about her name said in a quiet office in a way that placed it somewhere specific. "Yes," she said. Elena reached out and took her hand. "Then go live your life," her mother said. "The actual one, not the one you've been postponing." She told him that night, not in the club. He'd asked her to meet him somewhere outside Velvet Noir for the first time, a small restaurant unremarkable from the outside, where the owner greeted him by name, with the easy familiarity of someone who had known him a long time, and the privacy of a corner table that Sophia understood had been arranged in advance. He stood when she came in. She'd never seen him do that before. She sat down across from him and looked at him in the particular way she looked at things when she wanted to see them completely. "You went to see my mother," she said. "Yes." "Without telling me." "I wanted to meet her. I wasn't sure how to ask you, and I didn't want to make it—" He paused. "I didn't want to make it into something complicated. I just wanted to meet her." She talked about her choir students. She did, for 20 minutes. It was— Something warm moved through his expression. "She is extraordinary." She said the same about you. "She's more generous than is warranted." "She's a very good judge of people. 30 years of 8-year-olds teaches you things about human nature that can't be learned any other way." Sophia paused. "She told me what you said, about what she'd done for me." He looked at her steadily. "It's true. I know it's true." She held his gaze. "Luciano, I need to tell you something." "All right." I've been careful about what I say and when I say it, because this whole thing has moved fast and been complicated, and I didn't want to say things that changed the nature of it before I was sure." She paused. "I'm sure now." He was very still. "I love you," she said, directly, without softening it, the way she said every true thing. I know what that means in your world. I know it makes me visible. I know it comes with a particular kind of risk that I've already had a demonstration of. And I'm saying it anyway because it's true, and I'm done being careful about the true things. The stillness in him went so deep it was almost like watching him hold his breath. Sophia, you don't have to say it back right now. I'm not saying it because I love you. He said it the same way she had, directly, without qualification, the way he did everything when he meant it completely. I've known for a long time. I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like I didn't have the right frame for it. Everything I know how to give people is protection or resources or power. And what you've never needed from me is any of those things. That's not true, she said. I needed the job. I needed the treatment. You needed the money. You didn't need me. I didn't need you, she agreed. I chose you. Those are different. Yes, he said. They are. He reached across the table and took her hand the way he had in the private lounge. That is the part I'm still learning how to hold. That a person can choose something freely when there's nothing making them choose it. Welcome to what the rest of us deal with every day, she said. He laughed. The real one, she'd been collecting the real ones for months, and this one was the fullest she'd heard. It transformed his face in the way that real laughter always did, stripping out the gravity for just a moment and showing something younger underneath. Okay, she said when the laughter settled. What happens now? Now we deal with Massetti, he said. I've been making the moves we discussed. 3 of the neutral parties have come into alignment in the past 2 weeks. Costa says the consolidation is moving faster than projected. How long? Weeks, not months. He looked at her. And when it's finished, when this specific battle is finished, I want to talk about the rest. What rest? Your life, he said. The one you put on hold. Colombia. What you actually want to do with the next 10 years, if the next 10 years are not spent managing a crisis. She stared at him. You remembered about Colombia. I remember everything about you. He said it simply as fact. You deferred twice. The window for that particular program closes permanently at the 3rd deferral. A pause. I made a call. You made a... She stopped. Luciano, the deadline has been extended. That's all. The decision about whether to use it is entirely yours. She sat with this. The specific, complicated feeling of someone doing something for her that she hadn't asked for, but not the same as before. Not Rhea's, not the treatment arranged behind her back. This was different. This was him knowing her enough to reach for the thing she'd stopped letting herself want. You have to stop making calls without asking me, she said. I'll try. That's not a yes. It's an honest answer. His eyes held hers. I will try. I will do better at it than I've been doing, but I'm not going to promise I'll stand by while something you want is slipping away from you. She thought about that. About who he was. About the 19-year-old boy who had learned that caring about people without the ability to protect them was just giving someone a list of your vulnerabilities. About the man who had taken that lesson and carried it for 20 years and was right now sitting across a table from her, and learning at cost how to translate it into something that didn't feel like control. I'll take the extended deadline, she said. He exhaled. Good. But the next call you make on my behalf, you tell me first. Agreed. I mean it. I know you mean it. Something moved through his eyes. I know. She looked at him. How's your cousin? The shift in his face was immediate, the opening up that happened whenever she asked him about something real. She called Sunday. He paused. She's having a difficult semester. She's studying architecture. She's second-guessing the program. What did you tell her? I told her to finish the semester before she made any decisions. He paused. I may have been more directive than was warranted. You think... I'm working on it. The managing people's lives thing. Yes, that. She smiled. He smiled back. The real one. You're getting better at it, she said. I have a very patient teacher. I'm not patient, she said. I'm direct. There's a difference. Those aren't mutually exclusive either, he said. The Massetti situation resolved on a Thursday. Sophia heard about it from Luciano directly, the way they'd agreed, no managed information, no edited version. He called her from wherever he was at 11 in the morning and told her in plain language what had happened. The three neutral parties had moved. The consolidation had made Massetti's position untenable at the level that mattered not by force, not by the kind of direct confrontation that would have simply recycled into the next escalation, but by removing the conditions that made the attack worth launching. Massetti was still there. He was not going to stop being there. But the calculus had changed exactly the way she'd described. It's not finished, Luciano said. It won't ever be completely finished, but this chapter of it is. Okay, she said. Are you all right? I've been all right, she said. I've been all right the whole time. A pause. She could feel him smiling through the phone. It was a thing she'd learned to do, read his face through his silences. Come to the club tonight, he said. Not to work, just come. What are we doing? Having dinner, in the private dining room, like normal people. You want to have dinner like normal people. I'm aware of the irony. Just making sure. Sophia. Yes. Come to dinner. She smiled. I'll be there at 8. Velvet Noir at 8 on a Thursday had its usual quality of contained energy, the particular atmosphere of a room operating at full capacity with the appearance of effortlessness. Sophia had worked this room for 4 months. She knew every corner of it. She knew which booth had the slight temperature variance, which light above the bar needed to be replaced every 2 weeks, which table near the east wall had a wobble that the staff shimmed with a folded cocktail napkin. She knew this room the way she knew few other places. Tonight, she walked through it as herself, rather than as part of its machinery, and it felt entirely different. Diane met her at the entrance and walked her to the private dining room with an expression that was the closest thing to openly pleased that Sophia had ever seen on her. You look well, Diane said. Thank you. Sophia paused. Diane, how long did you know about everything? Diane was quiet for a moment. I knew he was watching you from the second week. She paused. I've worked with Luciano Moretti for 11 years. I've seen him watch a room. I've never seen him watch a person the way he watched you. And you didn't say anything. It wasn't mine to say. Diane stopped outside the dining room door. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. So am I, Sophia said. Diane opened the door. Luciano was standing when she entered, again. She was going to have to tell him he could stop doing that, or maybe she wasn't, because she understood that it meant something specific, that it was one of the ways he was learning to say the things he was still building language for. The room was simple. 2 chairs, 1 table, candles. No performance, no excess. Just the clean simplicity of someone who had thought about what she would want and had arranged for that rather than for what would be impressive. She sat down across from him. Normal people dinner, she said. I'm trying, he said. You're doing fine. They ate. They talked the way they'd been talking for months. The layered, unhurried conversation of 2 people who had run through enough difficult things together that the ordinary things felt like gifts. He told her about Costa's daughter, who had gotten into her first choice of university. She told him about a moment that morning when Elena had sung quietly to herself in her hospital room, just a few bars of something barely audible, and Sophia had stood in the doorway for a full minute, listening, not wanting to interrupt because it was the first time in 7 months she'd heard her mother sing. He was very still when she told him that. She'll come home soon, he said. Dr. Reyes thinks 4 weeks, maybe 3. Where will she go when she's discharged? Sophia had been thinking about this. Her own apartment was too small. The stairs were a problem. She'd been running the math on the logistics with the specific discipline she'd been applying to impossible calculations for the past year. I'll figure something out, she said. Luciano looked at her across the table. I have a property in Brooklyn. Ground floor. Garden. Quiet neighborhood. He paused. It's been empty for 2 years. I've been meaning to do something with it. She looked at him. I'm asking, he said. This time, I'm asking. She held his gaze. She thought about her mother's face when she sang. She thought about Gerald's window ledge. She thought about what Elena had said, go live your actual life. The garden, she said. Is there a ledge? Somewhere a pigeon could comfortably land. Something in his face did the thing, the opening up the thing she'd been collecting since the beginning. I'll find one, he said. Then yes, she said. Okay. Yes. Elena Bennett was discharged on a Tuesday 5 weeks later at 2 in the afternoon. She walked out of the hospital under her own power, which Dr. Reyes had described as ahead of schedule, and which Sophia had described to her mother as completely in character. The Brooklyn house had been made ready. Sophia had spent the previous 2 weekends doing it herself, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, because the act of making a home for her mother was something she needed to do with her own hands. She'd had help, which was new. Luciano had been there on both Saturdays, apparently unbothered by the fact that hanging curtain rods and assembling flat-pack furniture were not activities his reputation had prepared people to associate with him. He was precise about it, which made her laugh, and he accepted the laughing with the specific patience of a man who understood that being laughed at by someone who loved you was one of the better things that could happen. The garden had a ledge. He had not asked how or where. He had simply produced a ledge affixed to the exterior wall at window height on the morning of the first Saturday without comment. She had looked at it and looked at him and said, "A ledge." "For the pigeon," he said. "You built a ledge for an imaginary pigeon. He'll be real once your mother moves in." A pause. "Gerald will relocate." "You can't promise that." "I'm reasonably confident." She laughed. He allowed it. Wash bowl. Elena moved in on a Tuesday. By Friday, a pigeon had found the ledge. Whether it was Gerald or a different pigeon was not something any of them could verify, and Elena declared it was Gerald by right of continuity and named him officially and put seed out every morning, and that was the end of that conversation. Sophia stood in the kitchen doorway one morning the second week and watched her mother move around the kitchen with the recovered ease of a woman who had clawed her way back from the edge of something and was now deliberately appreciating the distance she'd gained. Elena made coffee badly and sang to herself while she did it, and she looked out the garden window and at Gerald's ledge and at the particular quality of light in the morning, and she looked like herself. Like Elena Bennett before the illness, before the long, difficult year, before the $84,000 bill and the $31 in the bank account and the midnight corridor that had started everything. Luciano came by that afternoon. He did not stay long. He had the particular quality of a man who understood that some spaces were for specific people, and that his role in this one was to support its edges rather than occupy its center. He drank coffee with Elena for 45 minutes and listened to a story about a parent-teacher conference in 2003 that had gone in an unexpected direction, and he laughed at the right moment. And when he left, he touched Sophia's face briefly in the doorway, just his hand, just a moment, and said something in Italian that she didn't understand yet. "What does that mean?" she asked. "You," he said. "It means you." She looked at him. "I'm going to need more than that as a translation." "I know." A pause. "I'll teach you the rest of it." She held his gaze. Everything she'd been and done for the past year compressed into this single specific moment, the desperation and the hard work and the midnight tears in a hospital corridor, and the first night at Velvet Noir, and the balcony, and the feeling of being seen in a room full of powerful people, by the most powerful of them, seen not as a detail in his world, but as a person who mattered. She thought about what her mother had said in the hospital. Go live your actual life. She thought about the Columbia deferral extended waiting for her decision. About the semester she hadn't started yet. About the version of herself who had plans before the plans got interrupted. And about the version standing in this doorway, who had survived the interruption and come out knowing something the first version didn't, that the life you built in the middle of surviving was sometimes more real than the one you'd carefully arranged before. "Okay," she said. "Teach me." He smiled, the real one. The one she'd been collecting since the first time she saw it, and had known without words that it was rare. And standing in that doorway with her mother singing badly in the kitchen, and Gerald managing his ledge with the particular dignity of a pigeon, named Gerald Sophia Bennett, understood something that she hadn't been able to articulate until now. She had walked into the most dangerous room in New York City to save someone she loved, and she had saved her. She had worked, and she had fought, and she had made impossible calculations come out right. And her mother was alive and healing and making terrible coffee in a Brooklyn kitchen, with a garden and a window ledge and a future. And somewhere in the middle of all that surviving, she had found something she hadn't been looking for. Not a rescue. Not a fairy tale. Not a man who solved her problems because she solved her own problems. She had proven that definitively, and would keep proving it. She had found a person, complicated and wounded and learning the same as she was. A man who had spent 11 years making himself into something untouchable, and had discovered to his own apparent surprise that he didn't want to be untouchable anymore. Not from her. She had been the one to walk back down the corridor. She had been the one to knock on a door she didn't have to knock on. She had been the one to stay when she could have left. That was the story. Not that he saved her. Not that she saved him. But that two people, each carrying everything they'd ever been through, had looked at each other across a complicated room and chosen freely with eyes open, knowing the cost to stay. That was what love was in the real world. Not the arrival of someone who fixed everything, but the choice you kept making every day to stand in it with someone rather than stand in it alone. Sophia had made that choice. She was still making it. She was going to keep making it. And that was the truest, most certain thing she had ever known.